Okay, this is major if it's true. It's absolutely bombshell if this is what they're doing. Ethical Skeptic, who's been on top of the CDC's mortality and cancer statistics, has another huge expose on their Twitter account, @ethicalskeptic. They write, okay, I found it. The set dynamics are complex, but the principle is straightforward. When a death certificate lists cancer as the underlying cause of death and COVID as the multiple causes of death, the underlying cause of death and multiple causes of death are being swapped, and COVID is being listed as the underlying cause of death 100%. So basically they're calling cancer deaths that had COVID, COVID deaths that had cancer. So that makes COVID sound scarier, and it makes the cancer rates harder to detect. This is bombshell. This is absolutely a breakthrough finding from Ethical Skeptic. Another independent researcher, Josh Gutzkow, says Ethical Skeptic cracks the case. Cancer deaths with COVID are being systematically coded as COVID deaths with cancer. How absolutely sinister is this? So a key question is, when does this happen? Is it built into the CDC system that when they get a report of a death of cancer as the underlying condition, with COVID listed secondarily under the multiple causes of death, that they completely reverse the intent and the decision from the doctor or the coroner, whoever filled out the death certificate, and they're saying, no, we're going to tell the public that they didn't die of cancer as the underlying. And they tell people, no, they didn't die of cancer, they died of COVID with cancer. How disingenuous. This is extremely scandalous. So a huge shout out to Ethical Skeptic for catching this and for exposing it for everybody to see. So this is the evidence that's put forward by Ethical Skeptic. It's very interesting. Let's start by looking at the bottom here. Here's an example death certificate. You can see the switcheroo that happens. Basically, they're disguising cancer by putting it in between COVID and COVID. This is fascinating. So here are the CDC's instructions for completing the cause of death section on the death certificate. So I think this is relevant. It says the cause of death section consists of 2 parts. Part 1 is for reporting a chain of events leading directly to death, with the immediate cause of death on line A, that is the final disease, injury, or complication directly causing death, and then the underlying cause of death on the lowest line. The underlying cause of death is the disease or injury that initiated the chain of morbid events that led directly and inevitably to death. So this is a chain of events. The underlying cause is at the bottom, and then as you work your way up, you reach the immediate cause. And then over on the right, this is interesting as well and helps us understand it. We see the approximate interval onset to death. So for this example here, the immediate cause of death would be rupture of myocardium, and this was minutes before the death. But this all tracks back to the underlying cause of atherosclerotic coronary artery disease, which has been in the works for 7 years. 5 years back, we get to line C, coronary artery thrombosis. And then it goes to acute myocardial infarction. So I think we get the idea. It's a chain of events. The longest running underlying cause of death goes last. The immediate cause goes first. So to tie this back in with what we're talking about, Ethical Skeptic is saying, it looks like, based off the data, that the CDC is doing this switcheroo, where the immediate cause of death was put in as COVID, and the underlying cause as cancer. Then they sandwich in cancer as a multiple causes of death, which are these middle lines, and they put COVID in for both the immediate cause and the underlying cause of death. How crazy is this? This seems absolutely fraudulent. They just bury cancer away, even though it's the underlying cause. So if Ethical Skeptic is correct, they are burying away cancer as a multiple cause of death. So they're really trying to avoid putting cancer as the underlying cause of death. So remember, there's this downtime window where the whole system went dark. They said they were doing system upgrades, and Ethical Skeptic was all over it in real time. Let me play a little report I put out the other day about this. Wow, the CDC just released some really awful data in terms of deaths and cancers, just totally exploding off the charts ever since April of 2021. In April of 2021, everything changed for the worse. Deaths exploded. Cancers exploded. We need a thorough investigation into these vaccines, is my first thought. But shout out to Ethical Skeptic, who's been covering this very, very closely. theethicalskeptic.com, and @ethicalskeptic on Twitter. So what we're seeing here is a massive spike in excess non-COVID natural deaths. So what we're seeing here are the excess. So if it's below this line here, if it's below 0, that means fewer people are dying. If it's above 0, that means more people are dying than expected. So if you love humanity, you don't want to see this line going up. But look at where it's going over here. Ever since week 14 of 2021, which is April 2021, the deaths have been skyrocketing, off the chart. So from week 14, 2021 to week 31, 2022, 344,866 Americans died. Here's the other major finding that the Ethical Skeptic just put out. This is a surge in cancer cases. So again, this is excess cases, which is observed cancers minus expected cancers. And right around the same period, April of 2021, we start to see a massively surging amount of cancers just shoot off the charts. This one is even more pronounced than the non-COVID excess deaths. This is undeniable. Look, it goes all the way back to 2014. So we'll talk about this more in a second. I just want to give some more background here. This is really interesting. This was from a few days ago, on the 12th of August. Coin Anthony says the CDC has stopped reporting on cancers, aka malignant neoplasms, and a variety of heart disorders. Quote, went offline for, quote, system upgrades. The CDC knows we have a problem. They know what's happening. And this is in response to the Ethical Skeptic, day 70 of the system upgrade data compromise. MMWR week 30 posting is late. We saw in spades yesterday that an ACAN problem exists in American citizen health right now, with regards to cancer and conductive heart disorders. I think the CDC knows we have a problem. This is a great point. If you found yourself riding in a car at night on a mountain cliff road, going 70 miles per hour with no brakes, and your driver decided at that very moment to turn off the car headlights in order to do a headlamp upgrade, you should take that as a malicious act. Exactly. And now it's even worse. Because in addition to the downtime, we're seeing, hey, this might be why they were suppressing this data. Similarly to what we saw with the VAR's slow drip. So here's another update from Ethical Skeptic from 2 days ago. Day 74 of the NCHS system upgrade, compromising 31 weeks of death data during a risky period of critical evaluation. 1. MMWR week 30, due the 10th of August, never posted. 2. 7,148 cancer deaths are missing from the data. 3. 18,608 heart deaths are missing from the data. Here's another bombshell revelation from Ethical Skeptic. It appears as though the CDC lost those 28,000 death records in the upgrade. But the good news is I still have them in my data, so I am loading them correctly back into my models. Trust me, without these deaths, the arrival curves are incoherent. So let's go through these two major charts one more time. Cancer variance against trend from 2014 to 2022. And the variation we're seeing now dwarfs any variation over those past years since 2014. This is really scary stuff. Huge spike in cancer ever since April of 2021. Way off the chart. If these 425 over-attributions are added back into the cancer mortality MMWR weekly chart, then cancer lag suddenly conforms back to the arrival of all other ICD code lag functions. Amazing. So my interpretation of this, which could be totally wrong, is that all of the other ICD codes, which is the code for the cause of death, they're all in line with one another. And cancer's sticking out like a sore thumb because it's way out of whack with where it should be, based on all the analysis that Ethical Skeptic's done. So I presume they went searching to see what kind of trick CDC could be doing. Based on this, it seems like the Ethical Skeptic thinks that they've reverse engineered the trick that's being used. With this one explanation, with this one switcheroo trick of burying cancer as a multiple causes of death instead of underlying. Now, one key question, if this is true, where is this switch happening? I could imagine maybe hospital administrators changing protocol, to bury away the cancer? Or could this be the system upgrade of the CDC's system to bury the cancer algorithmically and systematically? If these 425 over-attributions are added back into the cancer mortality weekly chart, then the cancer lag suddenly conforms back to the arrival of all other ICD code lag functions. Amazing. One thing is clear, the ethical skeptic has been immersed in this data and knows it inside and out, backwards and forwards. What was the system update? Were they rigging the numbers to cover up cancer mortality? You know how evil that would be? And then they're going to call it COVID. And why would there be an active cover-up? Why would they know that they had to cover up cancers and call them COVID? What do they know? What foreknowledge do they have? This is super important work that ethical skeptics doing. So it's fascinating what could have happened here with the system upgrade. So honestly, I can't really tell you too much about this chart here and this big divergence. But what I think is the key takeaway is with this trick, it resulted in 425 over-attributions. Over-attributions to COVID, that is. Under-attributions to cancer. And what's really crazy is that these 425 over-attributions account for 20% of all COVID deaths. 1 out of every 5 people they said died of COVID might have been a cancer patient who died that they're sweeping under the rug to protect their sacred cow. Just a theory anyway, we'll have to watch this.
But there will be a trade-off. We'll have less safety testing than we typically would have. And so governments will have to decide, do they indemnify the companies and really say, let's go out with this when we just don't have the time to do what we normally do.
As I understand it then from what you're saying is that it may be that there needs to be some compromise in some of the safety measures that would normally be expected to create a vaccine because time is so crucial.
Well, of course, if you want to wait and see if a side effect shows up 2 years later, that takes 2 years. So we will, I think, be able to get some safety indications, but this is a public good. And so, those trade-offs, the government's working on a cooperative basis will be involved in the decision to say, hey, the regulator says go ahead, even though you haven't taken the normal time period.
If you take it and then a year goes by and everybody's fine, then you say, okay, that's good. Now let's give it to 500 people. And then a year goes by and everything's fine. You say, well, then now let's give it to thousands of people. And then you find out that it takes 12 years for all hell to break loose. And then what have you done?